Welcome to an Evolved review. This is part of our brand new entertainment platform, Entertainment Evolved. I am James Caleb Kitchens, and I'm joined today with my co-host, Caleb Stovall. Caleb, how's it going?
Hey man, what's going on? Just being quarantined here on this rainy day, just like everyone else, pretty much.
Yeah, we had a little bit of spare time with the quarantine going on here, so we decided we would get this kind of video podcast off the ground. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be reviewing and just sort of discussing in depth the wrestling documentary Dark Side of the Ring, which is very popular. I've just recently started watching it myself. We're going to talk a little bit more about it here. We're going to be talking about the very first episode today. So if you haven't seen it yet, you won't get a whole lot out of this. So go check out the episode and then come back and see us, and we'll get a little more in depth with it. The very first episode of Dark Side of the Ring, Randy Savage and Elizabeth. So that's what we're going to go with today. And like I said, you can see this episode on YouTube. You can see it on Hulu. You can see it on Google Play. And so we're going to talk a little more in depth about it, about the narrator, about the speakers that are on there, and just sort of the content in general and how it's affected us over the years.
Yeah, sounds great, man.
Well, before we get into the meat and potatoes of it, I want to thank our sponsor here today, 4EY Designs. Hit up Matthew Campbell over there. He does an amazing job with graphics, artwork. He actually, if you see that Evolved Review logo up there in the top right hand corner, he actually made that Evolved logo. If you see the Entertainment Evolved logo, he did the work on that. And so, yeah, you see his contact information there on the screen. You can hit up his social media. You can hit up his website, 4eydesigns.com. And he does amazing work. If you're familiar with Viral Pro Wrestling, he also, which Mr. Stovall and I are both involved with, he does all the graphic work for that now too. So hit him up. He does an amazing job. And with that, we're going to get into the meat of the episode here. So Caleb, what's kind of your overall thoughts on this first episode here with the tragic story of Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth?
Well, it's interesting because, like, I feel like it's kind of that set the tone episode for what this series is kind of trying to do. A lot of the times when you see like outsiders, I don't know if the term is if that's necessarily the term, but either outsiders or people who are not necessarily involved in wrestling that do a documentary series. A lot of the times, it's always focused on the very negative aspects of wrestling. It's always don't do this because it does this to you, or this is how it is and everything. When the reality is, wrestling is just like any other job where it's kind of like you make it your own experience and stuff like that. And people have very successful experiences, such as the Macho Man. I mean, let's face it, he's, one of the biggest of all time. But I think that this definitely showed you, though, what they were going for. They wanted to show the respect to wrestling, but as well show you that, yes, there are these dark stories and there are these, stuff that you don't necessarily want to hear about the business, but it happens. Life happens that way. And that's why that's when I've really become a fan of the show for that reason. I think that they do a great job of balancing the two and kind of make your own kind of judgment on it and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's actually a great perspective. I agree. A lot of your wrestling documentaries, it's either one of two things, right? You've either got this incredibly narrow, insider perspective on the business where only other people in the business are going to understand it or care about it. And then you have the other thing, which is like the 2020 episode where it's just kids backyard wrestling hitting each other with light tubes, or we'll get into this in a later episode, the Chris Benoit story and how it was portrayed in the media and how that evolved over time. There's definitely sort of this polarized kind of outset when it comes to wrestling documentaries. Like you said, it's either incredibly positive but really insider and sort of like a fanboy kind of view on it, or it's incredibly negative and it's completely outside. So I think the people who do Dark Side of the Ring, you can tell they have a reverence for the art.
Yeah.
Um, and you could tell this by the people that they get to narrate some of these episodes. This first episode is narrated by Dutch Mantell, who's a legend in the wrestling
Murder
business.
Dash.
Exactly, legend in the wrestling business. So, um, yeah, let's talk about the Randy Savage Elizabeth story and how this kind of affected you and I on a personal level. Um, so for me, uh, this was sort of something that I enjoyed in retrospect, right? So I was always a fan of WCW from the time that I was like 5 years old up until probably
Same here.
2001. Right. And so everything WWF prior to like 2000, 2001, I went back and experienced that. So this was not something that I experienced as it was happening. And I really would have been too young to anyway. I was born in 87. But, you even not experiencing this firsthand, you always sort of, when you got into wrestling, you understood that Randy Savage and Elizabeth were sort of like this top, like power couple. They were the couple in wrestling. It's basically, in my opinion, the best romance storyline that's ever been done in pro wrestling, at least on a national or international level.
Yeah, one of the things I kept hearing about it, and what I've always heard from that story, is that they were really the first couple of
Right.
wrestling. Nobody really tapped into that side of pro wrestling. It was always, really before the WWF, and I love how they even called it the WWF. They didn't call it the WWE and everything like that. But um, back then, no one really tried to do those types of storylines. It was just, basically like a sporting event. And then, of course, the WWF started with the entertainment and stuff aspect of it. And yeah, they were really like the first couple of pro wrestling. And it was always just whatever they did with the two of them, it just was great television because they understood their roles and they understood their characters.
Yeah, and you could really, as this episode covered, you could always tell that there was a real life aspect to it there, and even if you didn't know that they were married behind the scenes, because this is back when kayfabe was very much still alive, you definitely could tell that there was a incredible like chemistry between the two of them. Even going back and watching the footage, um, even knowing what we know now, I mean, going back and watching it, I mean, they just had this incredible like on screen chemistry that you really don't even see out of like professional actors. I mean, you go see a movie that's that's designed as a love story. It's got two of the top billed actors in the world on there, and there's no chemistry in between them at all.
Yeah.
You know,
And a lot of wrestling couples, today just don't even match up to what Macho and Liz did, because everyone can kind of just see the difference now. And everyone's a lot smarter too, kind of thing. But and plus a lot of relationships which we do see in the documentary, unfortunately, which I'm sure we'll get to. But a lot of relationships in the wrestling business don't work out because it's a tough business. There's politics involved, there's travel involved, there's all of this stuff, and one wants something different than the other. Macho, wanted to keep going and stuff like that. Liz at one point wanted to, get off the road and stuff like that. So it can put a strain on your relationship. So I think that's why they don't really do it a lot nowadays.
and well, something that they touched on a little bit in this documentary too was Elizabeth was the first female that got to that level in the wrestling business without ever actually stepping in the ring, having a match. Like she was not a wrestler. And it's interesting that you talk about today, kind of the trying to have a relationship in the business is today a lot of times there is that struggle back and forth where, you know, the guy in the relationship or the girl in the relationship, they both are trying to look out for their own careers.
Right.
It's very rare that you have somebody that's a valet only today. Almost every female in the game is a wrestler.
Oh yeah,
You
yes.
know,
The business has definitely evolved in that sort of aspect, I guess.
right, and as someone who is a booker in the wrestling business,
Mhm.
you're never going to be able to, whether two people in a relationship or not, you're never going to be able to kind of tiptoe around looking out for everybody's, long term, like kind of career goal for themselves, and also, putting on a compelling product. So there's always going to be a push and pull there. And so I think it's incredibly hard, probably more difficult today, to try to have a relationship on the road.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Like I've seen people working with viral and working with flatline back in the day and stuff like that. I would see, kind of how hard it was on some couples, because you would see them hanging out in the locker room and stuff like that, but you could just tell that there was, just this like, I don't really like what you do kind of thing, kind of thing. But it happens, and that's just the nature of the business sometimes. But I think when you add in a certain level of fame to that, then it becomes really tumultuous at times.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, the wrestling business is full of people with egos, and and I've said this a lot about the business in general. Is not everybody can handle it, and I don't necessarily mean the physical aspects of it. Of course, there's that, um, but when you go out there in that ring and people are chanting your name, there's something in some people that they just cannot handle that, and it can have you, even if you're not an egotistical person, if you're not a self-centered person, you can start to believe your own hype. And some, like I said, some people just cannot handle that. Some people start to believe it, and so that's tough in general. So you throw a relationship into that mix where you have somebody who's having to have that, sort of deal with that person that you can become on a personal level. And that's not to say everybody. Some of the most humble people I know are also some of the most over people out there.
yeah,
So, some people handle it incredibly well. Some people know, hey, this is a job. Hey, this is a work. And then some people get into believing their own hype. And it does do something to you. It's very hard to resist that, because there's just something about the human psyche that, you know, you get out there and you have 300 or 500 or 1,000 people chanting for you, then, there's just something about that that's just, it's really invigorating is probably the word to use.
it's a feeling that you can't really describe to anyone. It's just you either experience it or you don't. And
Yeah.
a lot of people who have rose to fame in wrestling, well, I shouldn't really say a lot, but like some people that we know that have rose to fame in wrestling have not been able to handle it
Right.
because they're just whoa, I was not prepared for all of this and stuff like that. And plus, like you talk about not having any free time. You're constantly in the spotlight. And once you get to that level, it's just nope. You're in the spotlight 24/7, whether you like it or not. Especially nowadays with social media. Imagine if they had social media back then.
Yeah. I mean, I can just see the, Macho Man posting to his Instagram story every day, cutting a promo on there, or whatever. Um, and the Slim Jim commercials would have been all over the place.
Yes,
Uh,
they would
so
have been more annoying than they are now, but you still can't help but watch them.
something, since we're talking about their relationship, this is something that occurred to me while I was watching the episode. I want to know your thoughts about it.
Okay.
As I was watching, listening to them sort of talk about how Randy was always so obsessive, and how they kind of made that into the angle where he would go out and everybody liked her, but they didn't like him. And
Right.
he would kind of do these things that were like borderline abusive to her out in the match or whatever, or put her in harm's way. And then she would just stick with him, and they would go right back to being the couple. Do you think that the Joker and Harley Quinn relationship was sort of based around that fact?
Ooh. Uh. Well, you would probably know that answer better than I would, but yeah, possibly. Possibly the Joker and Harley Quinn have always, well, they've had a very strange relationship in general. But yeah, I mean, but let's be honest though, like the way that they did that with Macho and Liz was absolutely brilliant for its time. You know
Right.
that was that was just oh my god, that's brilliant storytelling, and you had the perfect two characters to pull it off. Had it been anybody else, nobody would have even remotely cared. They would it would not have rose to heights that it did, but because the Macho Man was not only, it looked like he was, I guess controlling and abusive or whatnot, but then you just add in his explosiveness in the ring and that charisma every time he could have. Seriously, easily the most imitated wrestler of all time. Ooh yeah! Everyone in that documentary had a Macho Man voice.
Yep.
Even Linda Hogan had or Linda Balea. I guess that's not her name anymore, but she had a Macho impersonation.
Yeah, that's one of the things. As I was watching the episode, I was actually noting it down, and I want to, in a little bit, we're going to talk about some of the people who spoke on this
Right.
episode, and I want to talk about like who maybe had the best Macho Man impression. Or uh, so yeah, that's definitely something we should get to. But on that note, though, what you were saying, both of them, both Macho Man and Elizabeth, were legends and icons separately.
Yes.
Elizabeth should be in the Hall of Fame all day long. Both of them were their own sort of iconic character and iconic person, and just a integral part of the wrestling business. And then you put the two of them together, and now you've got this ultimate power couple. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, it left a lasting impression on the business.
And I remember watching too, just the interviews and stuff like that they were doing, like when he's like, "Ooh, see a picture of Miss Elizabeth, but no Macho Man. Looks very bad." Elizabeth throws it at her and stuff like that. And a lot of people might look at that and go, "Oh, well, he is abusive. He is control." I don't think he ever once did that to Miss Elizabeth. In fact, I think he would hurt himself before he would hurt Elizabeth like that. Like in real life. I'm not talking about in front of the camera. Obviously, he's gonna, do that kind of stuff because that's what the heel's supposed to do. He's supposed to be a bad guy, and he did it very well. Macho Man is one of those people, you watch this documentary and you realize that he is one of those guys that it didn't matter whether or not you told him to be the most hated guy or the most beloved guy. It was going to happen either way. The fans just gravitated towards him, and they gravitated toward Miss Elizabeth, her beauty, her charisma. She might not have had the explosive personality or whatnot, but she just had this, just, oh, she looks like a fairy tale come to life kind of thing. And just the two of them played it so good, and everything like that. But I just remember watching some of those clips, and I'm thinking, like, it was almost like they were kind of positioning it like it was like, oh yeah, this is how he really was, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not, that's over the top, like, but
Yeah, yeah,
still.
absolutely. Yeah, and here's the thing is, they talk about it in the episode a little bit that they he was the heel, she was the baby face. In WCW, they flipped the script, and now she was the heel, he was the baby face, and they always pulled it off.
Yes.
My earliest kind of memory of Randy Savage, where I really started getting into his stuff, was his feuds with DDP and WCW. Um, if you don't know this and you're seeing this for the first time, you don't know this about me. I'm a
Yeah.
huge Diamond Dallas Page mark. And so when I was a kid, I mean, he was just my hero, idol. I watched everything he ever did several times. If he was going to be on, WCW Saturday morning, I was going to be up at 10 a.m. or whatever to watch WCW Saturday morning. Screw the cartoons. And this was back before DVR. If I missed Beast Wars, I couldn't go back and watch it. Or Batman animated series. That was it. You had to choose what you wanted to watch.
Yeah.
You know. So
Yeah, I remember those days.
yeah, yeah. WCW Worldwide, and then Thunder, or whatever programming WCW had that he was on, I was going to watch it. And so his feud of the Macho Man, I hated Macho Man because he was the heel, going in to that, and he would just beat the shit out of DDP, and I'm sitting there like screaming at the television,
Yeah.
the wonders of professional wrestling before you know what's behind the scenes, like when it's when it's not a work to you and you believe it.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes you just want to go back to that, to being able to have that kind of emotion with it.
Oh, I know. Like, because I remember during the whole NWO storyline, I remember like the entire time. That was when I thought, pro wrestling was a legit sport. Like I thought, oh wow, so this is these are sports guys and stuff like that. Now you go back and you watch it and you look at that and you look at some of that stuff and then the attitude era and stuff like that and you just go, how did I ever think that this was real?
Right.
Because if people coming back from the dead and brothers, fighting after a brother's been burned to death and everything. And there was a damn episode of the Attitude Era. I'll never forget it. It was they were embalming Stone Cold Steve Austin
Yeah.
alive, and I was like, I just went, oh god. Like I watched that back recently, and I went, oh Lord, I can't show this to people. They will not take it serious.
Yeah. Most of the Attitude Era was like that.
But you talk about, and that's one thing that we haven't really talked about the Macho Man just yet. But we forget how good this guy was in the ring. I
Right.
mean, he's one of those guys. You hand him a broomstick, he can make a 5-star match out of
Yeah.
it. He was that good. One of the matches that everyone talks about still to this day, many consider it one of the greatest match, maybe the greatest match of all time, which was him and Ricky Steamboat. And it's funny, before we continue, it's funny to me that Steamboat does not get the credit that he deserves, because if anyone realizes that he is in regards to two of the greatest matches of all time, him and Macho Man and him and Ric Flair.
Right. Yeah. And the guy across the ring from him in both of those matches is overly credited for the success of those matches, just because Flair and Savage are just, they're on another level. Steamboat is definitely an icon, a legend in the business. He's a Hall of Famer. But you look at, there's that sort of, God tier in
Yeah.
pro wrestling that you can get to that only a few people have ever gotten to. And Flair and Savage, and Hogan and Stone Cold and The Rock, they're all on that level.
Yes.
And
They,
that's,
they
it's a,
transcend the business.
yeah, I mean, you're talking about the elite, the best of the best, right?
When you've got rappers in today's day and age that know who Ric Flair is and make a whole song after him.
And he's in the video.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's in the video. He also did a live performance with him and everything like that. That's when you know that you have transcended pro wrestling. Like
Yeah.
like there's nothing anyone can do to your legacy, basically. Um, but Macho Man, it's funny because I thought him and Flair had some really great matches, especially their time in WCW. I remember the Great American Bash, 1995, and he was gaining revenge for his father, Angelo Popo. And they brought him into the storyline. Ric Flair attacked his father and everything like that. So they set up for the Great American Bash '95, which was actually the return of the Great American Bash at the time for WCW. It had been away for about 3 or 4 years. And so Macho Man and Ric Flair were the main event. And they had an awesome matchup. It almost got a 5-star review from Dave Meltzer on that, which is, neither here nor there sometimes. But, for the most part, though, like for it to be considered that good of a match, especially at 95 and especially at their age at the time, that just goes to show you that they are just two of the tops ever in the business. But here's a question, though, that I've always had that many people say this about Macho Man. Was he one of those guys that really liked to go over the match, move for move for move, and made sure that, like, they got it right out
Yeah. More obsessively. I mean, obviously I was never in the room, right? but I have been in the room with a lot of incredible, talent, and I will say that the stories that I hear about Macho Man make it seem like he was more obsessive than anybody. So, and while we're on this note, this is actually probably a good time for us to start talking about the people who spoke on the documentary, because I have a story that's absolutely relevant to this. So,
Okay.
Jake the Snake Roberts, another all-time great. One of the he is known as one of the best, if not the best, from a psychology perspective of all time,
Yeah.
easily, which is why he's being used on AEW. And I had the privilege of sitting in on a panel that he did at Dragon Con last year in Atlanta, 2019. And when I say that this panel changed my life and like my outlook on life, it was one of those things where you left the room and you really felt like you had connected with the speaker, and that it gave you a different perspective on everything. And not to go off in a Jake Roberts episode, because if there's not a Jake Roberts episode of Dark Side of the Ring at some point, then I don't know what they're doing, because he has just such an amazing story.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I don't want to go too far into it. But he talked about sort of his sort of rise in the business, and his fall in the business, and a lot of the shortcomings that he had, and then how Diamond Dallas Page basically like saved his life. And one of the things he talked about is he went in depth into the story that we see in the documentary. He spent probably about 20 minutes talking about that, about the how Savage spent 30 minutes going over just the bite from the snake, and and
He
and
not only went over it, he told Jake, you basically you need to let the snake bite you.
yeah, yeah,
Ooh.
and he did, and he sat there and watched him and made sure he didn't take any pills or anything like that for 30 minutes to make sure that the snake really had didn't have any venom, that he'd been fixed, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that he was like that about every aspect of the match, and that's one of the things Jake Roberts talked about in that panel, is that yes, he wanted to go over everything repeatedly down to the very last detail, because he was a perfectionist, um, and to the point that he could never really be happy with anything. That match with Ricky Steamboat kind of haunted him, because it is considered by many to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest match of all time. And so he always was trying to surpass that. He was always trying to get to that level. And I don't, he's not here, unfortunately, for us to ask him if he ever feels like he got back to that level or transcended it. But that is something from somebody who's a perfectionist. That's kind of the curse, right? Being a perfectionist. If you ever do manage to get something together that you consider to be perfect or almost perfect, you're going to spend forever like living in the shadow of that thing.
Oh yeah, because you can never recreate perfection like that. It just kind of happens. It's organic. Even if you do go over the move 75 times in the back, it's still it just it comes out the way it comes out. It's one take, you're done,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, I mean, just me personally, I've experienced that with, you book an angle and it gets over really well and everyone loves it, and then you're like, oh God, well now I have to top this, and then you do something, it's like, well that didn't top it. All right, well now so you're forever living in the shadow of your own success at that point. Once you do that, and I'm way less of a perfectionist than Savage was, so I can only imagine what must have been going through his head. Speaking of Jake Roberts, he to me has the best impersonation of Randy Savage. I mean, it's just perfect. It's spot on. You
Yeah,
know.
I love when he was talking about it. When Savage asked him, "Is it fixed?" Fuck yeah, it's fixed. It's a fucking cobra, you dumbass. Jake is just, Jake is just so entertaining. And I didn't mean to, cuss on that, but I was saying what he was saying. But,
No worries. We're we're
yeah,
we're we're a light PG-13 in here.
all right, cool. Well, but yeah, I loved his, but I love the introduction for Jake, where Scott Hall, listen, Randy, you're having this beautiful ceremony. Now cue the devil. And Jake just goes,
Yeah, that's such a great scene.
but Jake Roberts, you know, Jake, I have to tell this story about Jake Roberts for me personally. So, my dad worked at WGAC when I was a child and everything like that. And I was, I guess, just getting into wrestling and stuff like that. I was getting more and more familiar with it. And I knew Jake the Snake Roberts. Like, I knew that character. I had never really seen his old stuff or anything like that, but I knew of him. And so he comes in to do an interview on my dad's radio show for Harley, Drew, or yeah, Drew, Mary Liz, and Matt Stovall. Harley, Drew, Mary Liz, and Matt Stovall in the mornings on WJC. So
Wow.
he comes in to do an interview, and he gives me an autographed picture of him signed by him, and he's got his snake and everything, and he is with my dad, and he has got the snake like beside my father and everything like that. I'm just like, Dad, what were you thinking? He's like holding in. That's what he said, was just hold it in. So, um, but Jake, from what I can tell, you know, is probably, it's funny that he plays such an evil, sinister character because he's actually one of the nicest guys you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, he
You know,
comes across as such a really caring guy.
he does, but when you put that camera in front of him, man, I don't think even the best Marvel villain can stand up to Jake Roberts.
I
I
agree.
really don't. I like he's just like, if you've seen recently his stuff on Dynamite that he did, especially his introduction thing, like when he came out and interrupted Cody, I was like, oh my god, like where has this promo been? And then you saw him, doing the Lance Archer one where he's just sitting there with the fire, and I'm just like, oh my god, just he hasn't lost a step, and
Right.
he's so good at storytelling. And I loved his stories about Randy. I love the way that he told them, and they're telling stories and they're telling events that happen and everything like that, but there's still that entertainment aspect of, even when you get in front of a camera, you got to you know you got to sell it, basically.
Right.
And I love Jake Roberts. I love hearing. I could listen to him for days, basically talk about the wrestling business, because he's just so good. I loved how he said that, like, basically he was pissed at Randy for making that snake bite him. He's like, I'm pissed, brother. So, like, he basically goes and paintbrushes the snake,
Yeah.
and then the snake latches on, and McMahon is yelling at him, and he's like, I'm trying, man. I'm trying to get it off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, he can't get it off of him. Uh,
Yeah. And that would make me, like if I was in that position right there with the snake, I'm just like, somebody get him off me. Like, I'm gonna break character right now. I'm going to turn into a bitch right now on TV. It's gonna ruin everything. Get him off.
right. Yeah.
I like that story, but the story that surprised me was the one when Jake was talking about that night. I believe it's called Tuesday night. Was it Tuesday Night Titans, or it was a showdown in Texas, is what it was, and Macho Man versus Jake Roberts. And it's funny because I recently just went back and watched this event. Um, it was Jake Roberts and it was Macho Man, Randy Savage, facing each other. Liz comes down and tries to get involved, and that's where he slapped her and everything like that. I did not realize that there was actually real backlash on Jake Roberts for that incident from Liz's family to Macho Man. They were like, "Don't you come, like, you promised our little girl would never get hurt." And even Randy at that point was probably like, "Hey man, it's a show. He didn't actually."
Yeah. Well, maybe he was and maybe he wasn't. Back then, people were a lot more protective about the business.
That's true. And
You
if
know.
you were crazy inside the ring, you were crazy outside the ring. Like, you lived your gimmick. Bruce Pritchard said it in the best. And if we're talking about storytellers in this, I disagree with him a lot. It's hard to tell a lot of the times when he's kind of, I guess, kayfabing you, I guess, or whatnot. But I do love the way Bruce Pritchard tells a story. I
Right.
really.
Yeah, it's something that probably won't be, we really don't have to get uh, into it as much as on this episode, but on some of these episodes, as we do them in the future, we're going to talk about, you know, are these people reliable narrators? Do they have a reason to lie? Right. And so I don't want to get ahead of myself and talk about other episodes, but some of them, the people who speak on the documentary, they have their own agenda, right?
Hmm.
Either they're trying to paint themselves in a certain light, positive or negative, or paint another person in a certain light, positive or negative. Uh,
Oh yeah.
so, on this one though, I don't think that's really the case. I think everybody that spoke on this one has a pretty significant reverence for the body of work, if if not on a personal level, at least the body of work of both Miss Elizabeth and Macho Man.
Yeah, I definitely didn't get the sense of anyone was trying to hide anything. They were just kind of trying to tell just the story of the two. And not just the two, but basically I guess why their life was kind of cut short, and everything. It really puts it uh, in perspective. But yeah, I loved hearing Bruce Pritchard on there. Jimmy Hart, on there. Jimmy Hart is a genius in his own right. I mean, a lot of the music that you heard, a lot of the cool music that you heard for WCW and some of WWE back in the day was was due to Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart was the one that wrote Hulk Hogan's theme song for WCW, the I guess Aerosmith version or something, or
Right.
whoever did that song. But yeah, he wrote that, and he wrote a number of other stuff for WCW. You can hear Bischoff talk about him all the time, and everything. And of course, Eric Bischoff was involved in this one. Is it just me, or could you literally put a picture of Eric Bischoff and just wearing a black suit, basically, and have devil horns out of his like head? Like he looks like, just when you see pictures of him, I'm just like, dude, you could literally like look like you were the headmaster or something.
Well, not to get too far into Bischoff, but I am a huge fan of Eric Bischoff and his contributions to the wrestling business.
Yeah,
Not to say that I'm not also critical of him. He definitely made a lot of mistakes, but a
yeah,
lot of the things in WCW that went really incredibly wrong, like crushed the company wrong, were really out of his hands.
yeah,
Um,
they really were.
and he is the only person in the history of the wrestling business to take on Vince McMahon and win consistently. Now he lost in the end, ultimately, like everyone else always has, but he is the only person to take a punch from Vince McMahon and punch him back and knock him off his feet from a metaphorical standpoint, from a success standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, and I credit him with that. Um, we also had another legend on here, which was Scott Hall.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and something I thought was interesting here. We talked about agendas a minute ago, so there may be one instance of it on here. So Scott Hall, we get later into the documentary where things have fallen apart. Miss Elizabeth has gotten into a relationship with Lex Luger.
Mm.
Um, eh,
I didn't realize the circumstances too surrounding that relationship. I did not know that they were fooling around when Lex was married.
yeah,
Basically.
yeah, and I mean, from some people that I know that are sort of like friends of him and his family, to this day, Lex is incredibly just kind of, I don't know if traumatized is the word, but he definitely still is dealing every single day with the circumstances surrounding her death. And I mean, I would be too if I
Oh
was
yeah.
in that situation. But what's interesting is, Lex kind of admits on the 911 call that they were, doing drinking wine and popping pills, and Bischoff talks about them being drugged up all the time. But then Linda Hogan, or Belia, or whatever she's going by now, says she spent a lot of time around Miss Elizabeth and never saw that. So did you get the idea that she was kind of trying to skew everything like towards a more positive kind of view on Elizabeth, or do you think that that Elizabeth just kind of hid it from her and she never let her see that side of her?
I think it's more Liz just didn't show that side of her, because I don't think that the two hung out as much when, that incident with Hulk and well, not Hulk and Randy, but the incident where, Liz wanted to get away from Randy, so she went down to the vacation home with them while Hulk was filming Mr. Nanny at the time. And then, that's when she got herself into a little bit of trouble, and Randy came down and everything and was mad and stuff like that. And that really strained the relationship between Hulk and Randy. And I don't think that she necessarily spoke, like, I don't think she hung out with Linda as much as she did in like her WWF days. Basically, I don't think that they hung out a lot after after WWF. I think more so during WCW they didn't really hang out as much, because the relationship between Hulk and Randy was just kind of too strained at that point. But it's funny that we say that, because they both go to WCW, and what do they do? They immediately form back into a partnership.
Right.
And they even said that on the documentary, which I found just so fascinating. I went, so he's divorcing this woman, but yet he calls her up and says, "No, you should come get a job here." Like, I'm like, that would be the last thing I would want, is to have my ex-wife where I work.
Well, it sounds like they still had a lot of like respect for one another, and I
Yeah,
think that's incredible to as far as the professionalism of both of them, that they were able to keep a working relationship even after that. And as obsessive as Randy was with her when they were together, I think that's a huge testament to his character, that he was able to put all that aside and still get a contract secured for her, and
yeah,
still wanted her involved. That tells me that, kind of regardless of some of the circumstances around their relationship and how he may have treated her at times, that he definitely respected her from a professional standpoint.
yeah, and they made it. Clear on there that, like, if Randy was loyal to you, then he was loyal. Like, if he liked you, he really liked you, and made sure you were taken care of, and stuff like that. But going back to what you were asking about, do I think that she was trying to cover up? I don't think so. I think it was more that she just really did not see that side, or if she did, she was oblivious to it, which
That
we can all be at times.
that was kind of the opinion I had too. And due to sort of these documentaries, these episodes get into some pretty dark stuff. It's called Dark Side of the Ring for a reason. And if you've ever had a friend or a close person who was, who abused drugs a lot, especially like your harder drugs and things like that, those people become an expert at hiding those things from people that they know are going to think less of them, or they believe will think less of them because of it, or maybe they don't want to get help and they think that person will force them to get help. All sorts of reasons. It's hard to say what would go through somebody's mind, once they get to that level, especially what Bischoff was talking about, that basically they were pilled up all the time.
Yeah,
So it's hard to really understand what would go through somebody's mind there. But I'm with you. I think that the difference in this case is that Scott Hall was doing drugs with them, so he knew they were doing drugs. Eric Bischoff
yeah,
was around them a lot because he was their boss, and Linda probably just had that hidden from her a lot, and that's a very real thing that that people that abuse drugs do to their loved ones, and it's a very sad aspect of life that this episode kind of shines that light on.
and I also feel as though, they didn't necessarily mention time in that episode, like when exactly around that time, but I kind of felt like that the Liz and Lex Luger stuff started happening around 99 and 2000. And Hulk wasn't evolved, or wasn't involved, because it wasn't evolved, wasn't involved uh, with WCW as much around that time, because that was when a lot of people were unhappy in WCW. That was when Vince Russo started coming in. That was when a whole bunch of management stuff happened. That was when the AOL merger happened and stuff like that. So a lot of things were going on around. So you know, I think obviously some people knew, but who was going to do anything? Who was
Right.
in charge? Who was going to tell them, hey, stop doing that or we're going to, get rid of your contract? That is one thing I'll say about Vince McMahon a lot of the times. When he feels someone in his company is like messing up to that level, he will step in and be like, look, you got to get your stuff together or I'm not, employing you, basically.
And we'll definitely talk about that in other episodes, in the
Oh,
future
yeah,
too.
yeah.
It will
And
come up.
I'm sure, and like I said, he doesn't do it with everyone. But I feel as though in this case, let's just say if Macho and Liz were still in WWE at the time, he would have stepped in and been like, "Okay, that's enough."
Right. I think so too.
Yeah. Now, is he going to do that for everyone? No. And to his defense at times, does I mean, do you think people like actually like go out in the open and do that in front of him? No, a lot of them keep it hidden. They're like, they don't tell anyone or they don't do it in front of anyone. Of course, Scott Hall and Lex Luger, they didn't care at the time. They just did it wherever they wanted to, basically.
Right.
um, yeah, it's just it turned out though to be a tragic situation, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree, and this is one of those things where a lot of these episodes are tragic, and this is one where both people involved with this were taken from us too early, and they were both legends in their own right.
Hmm.
So what's your we kind of get our closing thoughts on the episode here. What's kind of your overall thoughts on the episode, and what you know it, I don't you don't necessarily have to rank it, but what did you think about this one, and did you enjoy it? Was it did it shine a light on a lot of new things for you that you weren't familiar with already?
Yeah. Again, my thoughts for it being the very first episode, I think that it set the tone for what this series, like I said, is going to be. Where it's like it's going to show you the highs of everything, but then it's going to show you the very lows of lows and stuff like that. And I thought that this one was the perfect way to start it off because it is a tragic situation, but it is one where there's a sense of closure, in this episode and everything. And I think the biggest thing that I take away from this is, you know, that phrase that we hear so much in the business, but we don't really know what it is until we find ourselves in that situation, which is art imitating life.
Right.
And with Macho Man, there was a lot of art imitating life or life imitating art, kind of thing, whatever you want to call it. And I think that, what I got the most out of it, which is what everyone was saying, was he was an amazing guy. No one said really anything bad about him. They never said that he was this abusive jerk to her. That they said that's what he played and they made it very clear of that. Now, was he controlling, like was he protective or overprotective? Yes, they made that very clear as well. And I think that that has a lot to do with just the wrestling business, back then, especially being kayfabe was protected and everything like that. That unfortunately that's what you had with a lot of wrestlers, and a lot of wrestlers that were given that character could not come out of the character.
Yep.
Macho Man Randy Savage was that guy. He was the definition of not breaking kayfabe.
Jake Roberts says in the episode, he talks about some of the pranks that the guys would play on the road, and the exact quote is, "I would not want my wife around that shit," and you
Yeah,
can't blame him.
yeah, and Eric Bischoff even said it. He was like, yeah, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't want my wife around the boys like that. The boys are stupid sometimes back then. And that just comes with juvenile humor and that also just comes down to who's in charge and who keeps everything in line, basically.
Yeah.
Which not a lot of people did back in the days. even
Right.
even Vince McMahon himself, like it was happening on his watch. So it's not like everyone put a stop to it right away, and everything like that. But just what I got though, out of everything, what I got more was this episode was a lot for her though as well, to show her legacy, because a lot of the time she is eclipsed by the Macho Man at times, and you forget just how much of an important role she was to the whole thing, not just him.
Right. And for me, my final thoughts on this episode. Um, I agree with everything you said there. One of the things, this was probably the episode I was least kind of excited to watch. And honestly, if we hadn't planned to do this show, I may not have even watched it yet.
Yeah.
Um, because, and this is something that this documentary has done for me several times, and I need to just learn to trust them. Is I've said, I won't watch that one. I already know everything about that. They're not going to tell me anything new. And then I watch it, and I'm completely blown away. And I find out there's a ton of interesting perspectives on there that you're not going to find on WWE Network documentaries or some of the other stuff that you'll find out there on YouTube or shoot interviews. A lot of these they get really good perspectives of people who are close to the situation, and people who have a working knowledge of the situation. And, generally they're uncovering a lot of things that typically haven't been made public knowledge before. So I really liked that about this episode and very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. Like I said, it was the perfect kickoff to the whole show, in my opinion. And another thing too, thing that I didn't get to mention was Hulk Hogan was blamed, for a lot of years for the split up of Liz and Randy Savage. And there's a lot of people in the documentary going, no, he didn't have anything to do with it. He was filming a damn movie. Like, he's not gonna, figure out where Miss Elizabeth is. It's not his job, kind of thing. And
Wrong
so
place, wrong time.
do what?
He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, basically.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. And I kept when I kept seeing the reenactment of it too, because they have the reenactments of it, and you see Macho pointing at Linda, and I'm thinking, God, like where is Hogan? Like was he not there? And then like you see him come in, and I was just like, man, Randy, if that was like my wife and you were talking to her like that, we'd have some fighting words.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I definitely don't think I could beat the Macho Man in a fight, but we would have been fighting either way. So, speaking of great first episodes, so this has been the very first episode of an Involved Review. What we're going to do is we're going to bounce around a little bit. So our next episode that we're going to do is going to be from season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring, and it's going to be the Brawl for All episode. We're going to alternate with a more current episode, and then go back to season 1 and do a season 1 episode. So we'll alternate those back and forth. I want to take one more moment to thank our sponsor this week, 4EY Designs. You can see their information there on the screen. You can hit them up for any of your design needs. So thanks everybody for tuning in to this very first episode. Caleb, thanks for joining me. It was a pleasure to have you here. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Man, I love to talk about wrestling anytime, and if you want to hear me talk about more wrestling, if I could make a deep
plug it, baby.
Check me out on the Stovall Wrestling Network podcast, wherever you can find podcasts: Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Radio. We're on it. It's by TMB Studios, and we talk about, well, you guessed it, wrestling.
That's right.
So the Stovall Wrestling Network, we cover the past, the present, and possibly future. So check us out, podcast Stovall Wrestling Network.
Check it out. I'm even on a few of those episodes. This episode has been part of an Involved Review. You can find it on YouTube under Entertainment Involved, or you can find it on Facebook under Entertainment Involved or an Involved Review. Thanks, everyone.